Welcome to Good Life Podcast, where we talk about the search for significance, the pursuit of purpose, and the challenges facing our culture. Today, I have another special co-host, Jocelyn Carroll, with me today. And Jocelyn, you are one of the few people that I know that sometimes I cannot keep up with when it comes to sarcasm. So today we're going to do something a little fun. So
That's
welcome.
exciting. Thank you so much. I'm
Tell
happy
us a
to be
little
here.
bit. Yeah, tell us a little bit about what you do here at Relevant Church. You've been on staff for a while now.
Yes, so I am the Young Adults Director here at Relevant Church. So anybody ages 18 to 30, I try to allow them to have the most fun they possibly can while learning about Jesus.
That's cool. And you recently got engaged.
I did, yes, January 21st. So it's been a minute now, but we're super excited. We actually just started premarital counseling yesterday.
Wow.
So we're making money moves. But yeah, we're super excited.
It's crazy because when I think about you and Joey, y'all been around here for a while, and the two of y'all's like sense of humor together has to be, I just wish I could observe that
It's
in
unique.
private because
It's
he
unique.
loves dad jokes.
Yes.
And you're one of the most sarcastic people to a fault that I know. And so I
Yep.
can't imagine how that conversation goes down in private sometimes.
Yes, not always great. It's not always a good communication strategy to be sarcastic in all arenas. But we're doing well. We're doing better.
I think most of my communication, which anytime I see a dad joke, I will forward it to Joey. It doesn't
Yes.
matter how bad it is. I
No.
can't help myself.
He
So
can come up with a new one on the spot about any situation. So
that's great. And he doesn't come off as that type of guy either.
No.
That's what's funny.
Yeah.
So, well, congratulations. We're excited for you. Today, I
you.
thought we could do something fun.
okay,
Because you're kind of off the cuff, we had some of our people in our church and the community and people who listen to the podcast on a regular basis, pastors, leaders, whatever, just kind of submit some questions. And I thought we could do something called Off the Cuff with Jocelyn Carroll. You can ask the question. I kind of know what the questions are about, and I made a couple notes, but I'm just going to answer. These are my gut answers, not a lot of prep that's gone into this. One thing I do want to say, though, is we're not answering theological questions. We did have a few questions about the end times. We had one about Judas,
Right.
and I'm like, okay, I'll send those to another department. Those are good questions. But
Good
for the
questions.
sake of this podcast, I want to talk about kind of everyday life and the journey for everyday life. And so, yeah, I'll turn it over to you. What do we got?
perfect. Well, let's jump right in with something really heavy. Just kidding. What would you say is the best marriage advice you've ever received?
This is good. I think we're getting, actually probably at the time of the release of this podcast, we're in a family series. We just came out of a love, sex, and dating series a few months ago that I shared this thought. And I heard this actually in a message, not advice one person to one person. I guess when I was growing up, my pastor would say, or people would say, always make sure your spouse is your number one, or, most important relationship in your life. Well, then that changed to like, well, make sure Jesus is the most important.
Right.
Then your spouse. And so over time, I've heard this over and over, but really, I think it made a lot of sense when I heard it this way. If Jesus is your one, Julie is my two, which means like, if I can't pursue Jesus, I really can't pursue her. And then the key thought about this though, is when you start having kids, make sure your kids are your three.
Yeah.
And in that order, your priority number one, priority number two, priority number three. And that makes a lot of sense until you have kids. And then you
Right.
realize they demand so much of your time, so much of your energy. I have two boys, which is interesting because I think it's totally different with girls. Even how a mom's relationship with girls, a dad's relationship with boys, and vice versa are very, very different. But I think one of the greatest things that I have learned is that if Julie and I, first of all, I better constantly keep my relationship with God where it's at, because if not, everything else suffers. And there have been seasons, if I'm honest, of 23 years of marriage where maybe my relationship with God wasn't as white hot as it needed to be, or something took priority over that, or it was a stressful season, and I watched my relationship with Julie suffer and my relationship with my kids suffer, and then everything else after that suffered. And so one of the things we've worked really hard about on specifically the last decade is how are Julie and I, what are we going to be like when our kids graduate? My oldest just turned 16 and driving. He'll be out of the house in a few years. And my youngest, we got 5 or 6 years left with him. And so what does it look like after that? And so if we don't have a relationship with God and we aren't connected to one another, kids are gone. And what does that mean? And this is where so many empty nesters set in. So I think that's it. That's real simple. That's really broad. But I think, it's nothing profound. I think another piece of advice that I received that I thought was good in every area of life would be find a marriage that you look up to and spend time with those people.
For sure.
And that's gotten harder and harder as we've moved around the country. But early in marriage, we spent a lot of time with people. We're like, man, so they've done something right.
That's cool.
And so let's spend some time around them. And so now, if I'm looking for a pastor to model my life after, I also look at their marriage.
Yep.
And say, how's your marriage? What's your relationship with your kids? Did
Yeah.
your kids grow up in church? And that sort of thing. So,
That's important. I think something cool that Joey and I have learned recently, not that we're the masters of marriage, we're not even married yet.
Yeah.
So, but I think something big that we've heard recently is that you should always compete to be in the back of the line. So as we are getting married and learning to serve each other well, I think it's always just that competition of how am I serving you better today? And that's just by putting yourself in the back of the line each and every day and just serving the other person before you serve yourself.
That's really good. And I think as piece of advice, when you're 20 years into marriage, you start going, if one party's doing that more than the other, now what do you do? How do you manage that? And it's one of those things where both parties definitely have to be serving God and serving one another.
Yeah.
If not, if you can't serve Jesus well, it's going to be very hard to serve your spouse well. I said this in a series a few weeks ago, or a message a few weeks ago, where I said, the Bible says God is love, and love comes from God, and everyone that loves is born of God. And so, knows God, has a relationship with God. So if you don't know God and you don't have a relationship with God, you don't even know how to love the way God loves.
Yeah.
And so, if that relationship with God is not white hot, good luck serving one another.
Yeah,
it's good.
for sure.
It's excellent.
Well, let's go ahead and jump into our next question. Someone asked, what would be the most valuable lesson you have learned in ministry?
As a follow-up to the first question, I think I never understood how this would work, but I heard somebody say one time, don't ever let your ministry or the church, as I became a lead pastor, don't let the church become your mistress.
That's good.
And I was like, what does that even mean? Because I'm like, that's and the premise was this, don't let that become your first love on this earth. Mm-hmm. Make sure your wife is your first love, because you get so busy. There's so many demands. There's so many things that happen in life ministry. There's heartache, there's hurt, there's pain, there's celebration, there's joy, there's opportunity, good, bad, and ugly, that can become the forefront of everything. Yeah. And there was early in our ministry, there was a time where our student ministry was doing very, very well. And man, we were just foot on the gas at all times. And you can burn out real quick. Yeah. Your marriage can grow apart real quick. Then you add kids to the mix, and there's all those things that happen there. And so I think the time where this hit me the most, it's something that we've always had at the forefront of our mind. But about 2016, when we moved into our first building here at Relevant Church, it was the most taxing season of ministry ever. Until COVID, there were some things there. But I learned some things in 16 and 17 that helped me through COVID. And part of that was, making sure, even in the pressures of life, the stresses of life and everything else, don't let the ministry rob you of that relationship with Julie. And so that's been huge for me. We moved a little bit further away from the church because every time we were in the community, we were just bombarded. I can't fathom what it's like to be a legitimately well-known pastor. I mean, we're pretty secluded, but I can't imagine being somebody that runs a church of 5,000-10,000 people in a smaller area. I mean, you know everybody, and everybody knows you, good, bad, or ugly. Yeah. So that's one of the reasons we moved away, for privacy, to focus on our family and have a safe place. And that's been huge for us, because I know too many pastors, it all looks good on the outside, but the church is their mistress. And before you know it, it's not another person that came in the way of the marriage. It's the thing that God called them to lead that came in the way of their marriage. Yeah.
And when you did live closer to the church, how many autographs would you say you handed out throughout the week?
Okay, here we go. See, I told y'all. No, here's what it looked like. I would go eat at one of the Mexican restaurants. There's like 19 Mexican restaurants here in our area. I go eat, and then we'd be sitting there, and God love them, people would come and start talking to you, and it wasn't like, hey, how you doing? It was like, hey, how you doing? I'm having problems with my marriage. And I'm like, I'm trying to eat my rice and beans.
Like,
and
so
and so it was just like, well, that was a great family dinner. Yeah. And I care about those people, but I got to make sure that home is right. Yeah. And so that's
good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Sarcasm.
Okay. Why do you call it the terrible threes, and what advice would you give to parents and to toddlers?
So parents, you have, so the room, somebody asked the question, I think it was, people call it terrible twos. Yeah. We call it terrible threes, and because I think that's when they just get stubborn. And terrible twos are just, I don't know. It was for both our boys, threes were harder, and so I call it terrible threes. I don't know if it's because the next generation is just not catching up as fast as we did, but no, I think they're more stubborn. They know a little more when they're three, and so to parents of toddlers specifically, and I say this to maybe you got a kid that's 13, you got to start where they at. Yeah. But I've always said this: discipline their heart, not their behavior. I remember a vivid time in my oldest, when he was like, I don't know, 2 or 3 years old, right around the season, I was sitting up in his room and he got mad and kicked me. He just got mad. I was like, oh, I will hurt you. That was my, like, I'm going to be hit by a 3-year-old.
Right.
He kicked me.
Yep.
And I was like, what am I doing wrong? Something I'm doing is not working. And so we had a conversation with some dear friends of ours. And they said, tell me about your rules. And I was like, well, as I started talking about, what do you say no to? What do you say stop doing? And they just said, look, stop disciplining behavior and start disciplining the heart. Get together, come up with some values, some rules for your house that are just 2 or 3, maybe 4, and let's start there. And so we said, okay, what's the first rule that we're going to implement? And the first rule was just simply obey the first time.
Yeah.
So now it's not like, because I told you so, or this or that, or like, here's what. Just obey. We can have a conversation, but I need you to obey the first time. So now we weren't saying stop, quit, don't do this, quit jumping on. It was just like, when we say something, obey the first time. Now they don't have to remember all the rules. They just have to remember Dad said obey, Mom said obey. From there, we realized, okay, why do we want them to obey?
Right.
What do we want them to be able to manage in this process of obedience? And so we started talking about self-control and respect in that. And the reason we don't just tell you to obey the first time. As you get older, I want you to learn why to obey and why you should not have to be told to obey. You should have self-control in every area of your life. And then when you're a teenager and you keep your hands off the girls and all this stuff.
Right.
And then respect was, okay, the reason I'm asking you not to jump on your mom's couch is because you're being disrespectful to your mom's furniture and your mom's house. Quit throwing the ball in the house. All these rules that you could make up. Stop. Just have respect for people and other people's things.
Yeah.
And how you talk to people and how you communicate. Rather than stop talking back to me. Stop looking at me that respect.
Yeah.
And then as they got to about, 7, 8, 9, and you started realizing, you know what? We got to build trust in this is more than like, don't lie, don't do whatever. The last one we added was simply honest always. And I started talking to my boys about, look, trust is the foundation for any relationship. And so we want to make sure that anytime we're talking about anything, we know we can trust one another. Because if we can't trust one another, everything else is like roof built on sand. Roof and walls built on sand. We need a solid foundation, because if the foundation crumbles, everything else crumbles. So if you're not honest with me, you undermine anything else in our relationship. And so those 4 rules, honest always, self-control, respect, and obey the first time, have become our strategy for disciplining the heart. And I'm telling you,
that's good.
Man, I thank God for that advice. My boys aren't perfect, but God, I hear people talk about parenting is hard. I'm like, it's been pretty easy. By the grace of God,
Right.
It's been pretty easy. I got a 16-year-old now, and I think it's out driving, you want to know that you did some things right. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's fair. We have some toddlers in my house as well. I currently live with my whole family, so I like to say I have 6
Marriage
roommates.
can't come soon enough.
Exactly. So there is a 5-year-old in my house and a 8-month-old, I believe she is now. So terrible 3s do often turn into ferocious 5s. So it just depends on the toddler. But I would say that those rules that you have in your house can really be applied to any age. And I think they're pretty applicable.
I imagine it's hard living in a house like that too, because even if it's just mom and dad, it's easier.
Yeah.
Now you add mom and dad and older sibling, it makes it harder.
Yeah.
Mom and dad and, aunt and uncle or whatever, whoever else is in that,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, so who can I manipulate today? That's what the kid's thinking is like, I'll just go the path of least resistance.
Yes.
And then mom and dad are like, stop doing that to
Yes.
grandparents or aunts and uncles. I know my nieces come over and hang out, and like, I know Julie's a whole lot harder on our kids than she is somebody else's.
Right.
And so, she'll just like love on them and give them what they want. And I'm like, man, I can't imagine trying to raise kids and have other people around and having their influences in. So I imagine they know how to
be the yes man all the time.
That's right. And they learn to manipulate. That's good.
Yep.
That's good.
Okay. So we are here in Locust Grove, which we would consider a small town. It's getting a lot bigger. We have a Walmart. We've got a Tanger, and we've got traffic, so that's something.
I've never seen somewhere that had such bad traffic take so long to get things, though.
Oh, my goodness, yes. I live 3 minutes from Walmart. It took me 30 minutes to get there the other day. I'm I'm not going back home. I'm just going to sleep here.
There you go.
But in a small town like Locust Grove, often there are a lot of rumors in the community and church. So how would we deal with those?
Yeah, and I think I saw one of the questions that came in under this umbrella, and it was like, even like in the church world, there's a lot of topics and talking about people in the church and everything. And then in the community, everybody knows everybody's business. I remember when we first started Relevant Church, we did a series called Life in a Small Town.
Yeah.
And it resonated. Everybody knows my past. And I mean, like, I grew up in Griffin, 35 minutes from here. And some people would say, Carl Nichols is a pastor, and like, unfortunately, that's just part of being in a small town. But I do think, what I would say is we live in a social media driven culture with a mob mentality.
Yeah.
Cancel culture, if you want to call it that. But basically, wherever we can stir up the most thing, we can have the most influence, the most, we can go out and get marches on the street, or we can get more people, comment on it. We can cancel people. So I would say the hardest part about this is you're going to see things that are great that aren't true. You're going to see things that are terrible about yourself that aren't true. You're going to see things that are great about yourself that are maybe pretty accurate. You're going to see things that are terrible you don't like about yourself that are pretty accurate.
Yeah.
This is where a deep relationship with God is important. It's also don't believe everything you hear about everybody else. Like, do some self-discovery yourself. Somebody makes a comment about somebody or an organization or a church, or leaves a bad review or this or that or the other, or just runs their mouth. Like, I think social media is a net negative to our culture.
Yeah.
Not anti-social media. I just think in general, it just plays on people's emotions and gives them outlets they never should have.
Yeah.
Some people should not have that platform. And so when I think about just gossip, rumors, mob mentality, Pharisees, church world, sinners, everything in between, there's a great passage in Luke 23. I think we referenced it in our last podcast, where Jesus is basically on trial. He's standing before Pilate, and there's a mob of people that are saying, this man's not the king we wanted, but we need to crucify him. He's claiming this, and they're just telling all these things about Jesus. And then Pilate says, are you the Son of God? And he says, that which you speak is true. It's the only time Jesus responded was when Pilate actually said something that was true. And I'm telling you, this is the hardest thing in the church world. And when people, sometimes I just want to come to my own defense a lot of times, or I want to come to the defense of other people at times. And I think that's better than sometimes coming to your own defense.
Yeah.
But I think that's been a mob mentality that Jesus faced, and it's no different for us today. I mean, people still scream out things. So
For sure.
Pilate says, I find no fault in Jesus. So he kicks him over to Herod. Herod's like, I don't really want to do this. Kicks him back over to Pilate.
Yeah.
Then they become friends over a common enemy. And the mob's like, crucify, crucify, crucify. And they let a criminal go and crucify Jesus.
Yeah.
Because the mob, the loudest voices, the ones that seem to have the most influence, cause them to do the wrong thing. And I would just simply say, A, don't join the mob. And B, like, don't let the mob control how you live your life.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that answers the question, but the reality is, somebody also told me this: don't believe all the great things about yourself, because you'll get up here, and then when you hear things negative about yourself, you'll live in the valley. So don't believe the hype, and don't believe the valleys and the negative things. And I would say too, usually what you hear about an organization, it's not all that good or it's not all that bad. It's somewhere in between.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think too, it's easy to take things at face value on social media. And if you see one of your friends liking or sharing something, you share it too, or you tag on to whatever they're doing. I think what I would say is just do your research.
That's good.
You can just go up to the person or go to the organization and ask them what they are actually doing. Don't take it for face value, because it could be false or it could be true. You don't know until you check yourself.
I think one of the things that bothers me the most is when passive aggressive people post something on social media in a way that they know they're going to get a response from other passive aggressive people, and then it's just like this all out unhealthy dialogue with a bunch of unhealthy people.
Yeah.
Or, hey guys, what do you think about this, company or this organization or this, or when I went here, this, and I'm like, just grow up.
Yeah.
Just stop. And that's the generation we live in, when all we did is text each other. We didn't, it's stuff that people will say that they never said to your face or would say to your face, but it's just a passive aggressive way of taking jabs. Funny thing is, you talk about doing your research and understanding. I posted a clip on social media the other day that I agree with everything in the clip. But there's a bigger context in that. And somebody's staff said, "Did you watch the whole thing?" And I'm like, "No, I just like this clip." And they said,
Right.
the whole other thing was a dumpster fire," is what he said. And he said, "I agree with this clip, but the whole hearing was a dumpster fire." And so I was thinking, well, that's funny,
Right.
And but we got to be careful about certain things that we post like that, because of someone propagating an agenda that we don't stand behind too. So it's good.
For sure. What would you say are good boundaries for toxic relationships, possibly with family?
This is a question we get a lot. I know in our counseling department talks this. I mean, there's a lot of toxicity in families in general.
Yeah.
Everything from married people to parents being involved, to parents and grandparents and grandchildren, and the parents being in between, and you don't parent the way I parent, all the way to verbal and emotional abuse and some of those things, or maybe there's a sexual abuse in the past, and now you're trying to say, how do I have a relationship with my family? Man, there's so many layers to this question. I'm just simply saying I can't answer them all.
Yeah.
What I would say first and foremost is the goal should be love and forgiveness first. If someone has hurt you or wronged you, the layers of that can be way down here, or they can be very, very high. So we're looking for love and forgiveness the way Jesus did, but it doesn't mean we have to be in proximity to people who continue to hurt us.
Yeah.
And so in that season, we look two ways I think we can love and forgive. The first one is we look inward and say, did I do anything? Have I done anything, not that caused that, but that had contributed to that? Or have I done things that further that? Or are there things that I need to say, hey, I'm sorry about whatever, and just leave it at that?
Yep.
And then when you do what you can do, all of a sudden you'll find, like the Bible says very specifically, like do all within your power to live at peace with all men. So you've made peace on your hat. And then if they continue to be toxic or controlling, I know this is very difficult sometimes. Recently, we've had emails and conversations with mom trying to control the daughter because they got a granddaughter. And it's like, there is a point where you keep them at arm's length.
Yeah.
There have been people in my life that we've done this to, family and friends, where we say, you know what? We realize the closer they get, the more animosity that's built. So how close can we allow them without animosity? What do the visits look like?
Yeah.
What does the time with these people look like? Do we go on vacation with these people?
Yeah.
Do we allow them to be with our kids when we're not around? All of those things are what I call healthy boundaries, because at the end of the day, going back to what we talked about early in the podcast, is my wife is my 2, my kids are my 3. Everything else is a lot further down the list.
Yep.
For us, and our church is 4. Our immediate family is 4, and then the church is right in there as well, 5.
Yeah.
But I would say, like, too often, anybody that's in a toxic relationship, they're not a priority to feel like you got to work them into your week.
Yeah.
Set healthy boundaries. If you're in a damaging, abusive, verbally, emotional, physical, you got to push those people out of your life and love them from a distance. And that's a very generic answer, and I think talking to a counselor is a better way to handle this, because you got to realize sometimes where the hurt came from. Are there things that you need to address in your life? Yeah. Are you holding them to unrealistic expectations? There's all of those questions. But if there's anything you need to repent of and reflect on, that's where it starts. And then figuring out how far, how close you can allow them to be. So I hope that answers it.
It's interesting that this question came in too, because I just heard in a podcast or in a video something recently where someone was asking about the scripture that says obey your mother and father, but if their mother and father had been abusing them their whole life, or if they come from a toxic family, what does that look like? And I think the simple answer was just the only way to respect them is to hold them at arm's length, like you're saying.
That's good.
You can respect them from a distance. They don't have to be that same.
That's good.
Level of importance in your life anymore, if that makes sense.
And I think too, when we're reading the scriptures and we understand the scriptures, we have to understand the context. The assumption in that scripture was that you had a godly father and mother.
Yeah.
And so that's the hard. What if you have an ungodly father and mother? Anything that causes you to compromise, you can go back to the Old Testament. When Daniel prayed to the Lord, he said, you're not allowed to pray. Well, every day he prayed. He didn't obey something that would cause him to stumble or fall away or turn his back on God. And I think that's that fine line.
Yeah.
If these people are so toxic or so damaging that they're going to cause me to fall away from God or push, I'm not going to allow them within a certain distance. But I can love them, I can honor them, and I can respect them from this distance.
Yeah.
It's good.
That's good. We have one more question, and this one is a more reflective one. What would you say was the most valuable lesson you learned during COVID?
Oh, man. I wish I thought about this. I gave this some probably more thought than the others, because I do a teaching that I've done now for churches and pastors and staffs, especially in COVID, that has 6 things that I learned in COVID. And all of them are so important. Yeah. But the one that I would say is kind of an umbrella for most of them is simply that crisis sheds a light on dysfunction. So if there's mold somewhere in my house and the lights are off long enough, the mold just continues to grow.
Yep.
The mold's in there even though it's dark. When the light comes on, everybody goes, where'd the mold come from? It's like, it's been here. And I think crisis is that light that comes in and says, why haven't you turned the light on already and addressed this issue? And so for us as a church, for me as a leader, there were several things. I think we learned that our church needed some stronger systems, especially in discipleship.
Yeah.
And so churches across America struggle with discipleship. I mean, we saw how long it took people to come back to church, how they disconnected from church. Our church is thriving and doing well, but there's ways I think we could have made it better.
Yeah.
Had we done that. I think maybe when it came to relational issues within the church, maybe health of spiritual development of leaders in the church, there were some things maybe that probably could have been addressed. And I think you just assume, this will go away. It's not a big deal. And then all of a sudden COVID comes in and goes, boom, let's apply this to your personal life.
Yep.
You've got a marriage that's already disconnected. There's loneliness. People aren't talking, but you're just kind of surviving. And now all of a sudden you're quarantined in a house with people that you're not even connected with.
Yeah.
So I thought loneliness, being with my spouse or being with my kids, would help do away with that loneliness, but it didn't. All it did is make me realize now I'm present with them all the time and I'm still lonely. Mm-hmm. Crisis sheds a light on dysfunction.
Yep.
Financially, we're tight, we're struggling, we're barely making it, and now COVID hits and we don't know if we're going to get it paid. Boom, dysfunction. And so I think those are true. Okay, crisis with kids. Okay, my kids are, they have some behavioral issues, but they're just kids. Now they're quarantined for 4 months at home or 6 months at home or a year at home. And they go crazy because that small issue was a much bigger issue. This crisis magnified the dysfunction. So that's personal life, that's spiritual life, that's family life, that's organizational life. And I have found this to be true in so many areas, that we fill our schedules, and whether it's an organization, a family, with our kid, we fill it with so much stuff that it's busy that we think we're doing life.
Yep.
And then everything comes to a halt and everybody goes, let's take a look at this. And COVID goes, and everybody goes, oh my gosh, we're out of control. Mm-hmm. And this is why I think divorce rates have risen, suicide rates have risen, mental health crisis is real, because there was mold growing in the dark. And so that's the one big one. And we could talk about all kinds of other things related to that. But man, that question I thought that was a pretty interesting question. I don't know who asked that question. I don't know, it was probably a leader in the church somewhere, but that was a very, I'm passionate about this. I think I learned more in the last 2.5 years. It shed some dysfunction in my life. Because let's be honest, I don't like, Julie asked me one time before we were in counseling, she said, do you feel like you like to be in control? Mm-hmm. I said, well, it depends. I mean, if things are out of control, I don't like it. I don't have to be the one driving the bus, but I need to know that the bus is going to get there, you know? And if it's not, I'm going to be like, hey, let me drive. And so there's times and seasons where I like to be in control. And I think COVID just stripped all that. Like, sorry, bud, you don't have any control over anything.
Right.
And I was like, this is a weird feeling. Mm-hmm. And then we're building a building. There's all kind of things happening here at the church. We got a new building, $5.8 million building coming out of the ground, and nobody's in the building. You're like, whoa, what are we going to do? We don't have any answers. And so I don't have answers. I don't have control. I can't make anything happen. I had to wrestle some dysfunctions, I think, even in myself. So all that stuff is true. And so I would say don't always run from crisis. Yeah. Because sometimes they're good and you're better on the back end of them, but it can be painful in the process.
Yeah, for sure.
What about you?
I think during COVID, and this is more of a personal thing, I guess, but I just realized how much I need people. I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm at home 24/7, and Zoom just wasn't cutting it anymore. I understand the need for online church, but I just don't think that it was for me, for sure. And then when I'm back in a building, I realize how important community is.
Wow.
And just doing life physically in person with people is so much different than online. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to just land this thing. And, you know, if we can give you any step, maybe you're not connected to a church or a local body, wherever you're listening from, find a church that you believe in. And we gave some things in the last episode about how to find a church, what to look for in a church when it comes to a healthy church. But like, get in, get connected. You may have to put yourself out there. You may have to get a little uncomfortable, but it'll be worth it all. And if you've been sitting at home watching online church, let me say this without being offensive, that's not church. That's TV. That's watching. The church is a movement of people making a difference for the kingdom. And it's crazy because I got a buddy in surgery now as we're filming this podcast. Crazy. And he said, you know what? Nobody has to wear a mask at the hospital anymore. Anybody can come and go as they please. Like, even the most conservative, liberal, whatever, the most restrictive areas of our culture have said, okay, no reason to do it anymore. Let's go. So you need to get your butt back in church or get in church and find a community of believers. So that's great, Jocelyn. I know our young adults are connecting. They're studying the Bible together. They're serving together. That's been super cool. Been proud of you in the process. So if you're enjoying this, if this has been good, we'll do another Q&A maybe in 3 or 4 months. But like and share. We're on all platforms, Google Play. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Also, leave us a review. Not if it's bad. Don't do that. But
Right.
if it's good, leave us a review. And tune in next time for The Good Life. God bless you guys.